Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, BHSpringSolutions.com, back again for another session of High Power University. And we're going to be summing up the 1927 Grand Rendement and how it became the high power pistol. But I think it starts to become clear that what is it that makes the P35, the high power pistol, so great? And I believe today's modern high-power pistol, with some of the refinements and modifications and upgrades that have come along over the years, makes a strong argument for the finest battle pistol, finest carry pistol, finest home defense handgun ever made, quite frankly. And we're not even ashamed of that. Is it a 1927 Grand Rendement? Absolutely not. A 24-part pistol, not including grip panels and grip screws, that could be completely disassembled by hand with no tools. The slide stop was a screwdriver to take off your grip panels and remove your magazine release. Simple as that. What the high-power pistol became, and I stand by this statement. It's 2020. It's 98 years since John Browning designed the 1927 Grand Rendement. I have nothing in my gun safe that looks remotely like this, but I'd love to have it. It almost seems like John Browning had a time capsule, and maybe he went to year 2075 and saw what, we've still not seen, in our modern day of 2020. Came back in 1922 and put it on paper, built it, and that's just the way this guy did, so many years of his life, designing firearms and ammunition. And at any rate, what this just says to me is, look, the 1927 Grand Rendement was so far ahead of its time that even as much as Dieudonné Save walked the design back in terms of technique and in terms of methodology compared to John Browning, it still was the premier battle pistol in most parts of the world for decades and decades and decades, after, he completed what we come to know as the P35. It had some shortcomings. As we've seen, the barrel cam lug design that he came up with, that was not perfect. John Browning's design was better. It can even be used, meaning the round pin and the technique of making this round. That is even has been proven in aluminum frame handguns. It won't come as a surprise. This gentleman we keep mentioning, Leon Hubert, he was the inventor of the SFS system. He was involved in the Mark III upgrades that we're going to be talking about. When he designed the FN BDA-9, the double-action, single-action FN handgun that has a lot of similarities to the high-power pistol, he designed the barrel cam lug using John Browning's design that we see here on this barrel that, is for an aluminum frame high power. The FN BDA-9 again. We talked about this round pin that became a fixture and returned in pin form like this on the FN BDA-9 that Leon Hubert designed. We talked about the firing pin retaining plate. It proved to have fracture problems. The floating sear lever design, he got away with it, and it was because of all the competitive springs going on. Particularly, this is the one that saves the sear's positioning, and the fact that it's just huge. He used John Browning's internal extractor design, and it would appear that Dieudonné Save later did redesign that into the external extractor. And of course, we know that he did come up with a design that relied on competing springs and some interesting geometry in the magazine disconnect to satisfy the French folks and which is disastrous, as we know, for the high power trigger pull, typically, you know, out of the box. So that sums up the original P35 and some of the next adaptations. Oh, there was one other quick thing. On the recoil spring guide rod, and as it would turn out, I don't have one here in front of me that I want to show, but while I'm talking, I'll take one apart. The recoil spring guide rod was redesigned, we believe probably around the same time as the external extractor came along, and instead of having a screw in the end, it has another ball bearing. Basically, they found that fusing these two pieces together, I think, was simpler than making it one piece. And since you had two pieces here, you drop a ball bearing in one end and a ball bearing in the other end, and a spring in the middle, and fuse those two pieces together, and you're done. I think that was a simpler, even though it's again adding a piece, because it becomes 5 pieces now instead of 4. Probably a simpler recoil spring guide rod assembly to manufacture, nevertheless. So that was another change that came along at the same time as the sear pin was redesigned and became just a round pin, and the external extractor came along. Okay, we continue on now. Dieudonné Save has retired and has passed away. Leon Hubert is at FN, along with a team of designers that he was a part of and oversaw for a period. And an interesting thing about Leon Hubert, when the United States had the pistol trials back in the 80s, the FN had a couple of pistols actually that were entered into those pistol trials. The high power was not, it did not meet what the United States Army or military wanted. They specifically wanted a double action, single action kind of an operating system, and that was one of the reasons that Leon Hubert had been working on a double action, single action FN BDA-9. But during that time, when those pistol trials in the United States happened in the early 80s, Leon Hubert was FN's representative from Belgium that was sent to the United States for those pistol trials. During those years, we find one change that happened with the barrels. The feed ramp went from an arced kind of a feed ramp to more of a straight feed ramp. This is because typically this design is better for feeding blunt-nosed or modern hollow point ammunition. That change came along. Then the Mark III changes came along, and these were things that Leon Hubert was directly a part of and or responsible for, and we've got a bag that contains the changed parts that happened during that time. One change that happened was the extractor was redesigned. There was an arc made here in the body of the extractor that Leon Hubert was responsible for that. That was necessary because the sear lever itself, remember the floating sear lever? Well, Leon Hubert solved that, and he solved it, and a couple of things happened. This redesign of the head end of the sear lever itself is a firing pin block. So now the 1927 Grand Rendement we believe to be drop safe. That went away in when Dieudonné Save walked back the design. He lost the mechanical drop safety component, and this adds a muzzle drop safety component because it blocks the firing pin in the event of the firing pin wanting to move forward because the weapon is dropped on the muzzle. And also there is a spring that is under this, in the slide, that is under this sear lever. So it keeps this sear lever pushed into its own position like that. And that means it's keeping it away from the sear. The slide slams home. This is not floating. this is blocking the firing pin and is never coming in contact with the sear. Leon Hubert fixed that, what we believe was really a design weakness in the original high power design. So Leon Hubert was behind that, and really he did two things. He made the sear lever itself affirmatively positioned when the slide is coming back forward, and that sear lever is going to be now above the sear. He restored that component from John Browning's original design with a provision to keep it positioned positively. Also came along was the ambidextrous safety. So the little nub of a safety on this side that contains the safety, spring, detent, pin, 4 parts. This piece became 3. So you have the detent here, a spring behind it, and then the body and the left side safety itself. Much easier here to manipulate. And then a 4th piece being the ambi side lever, and then that is retained with a pin. So in both of these things that came along during Leon Hubert's time, in both of these things, only one component was added, one spring, and in essence a net 1 pin or 1 part there. Also during this time, and this was really kind of a big thing. MIM technology during Leon Hubert's time at FN was really starting to evolve and really starting to advance. And what once was thought of as a novel idea, I'm sure, and that is mixing steel in powdered form and being able to control its characteristics after it's a finished product, where you can make it virtually anything you want it to be. You can give it qualities of energy absorption. You can just do a lot with it. And one of the things you can do with it is you can make finite radiuses easily with a MIM mold, where again, machines like straight, they like corners, and they like 90s, and all that stuff. The firing pin retaining plate became a MIM part. And since then, the FN or Browning firing pin retaining plate for the high power has no reputation that we've ever heard of fracture. And this has a lot to do with technology that was advancing at the time at FN, specifically MIM. And it was an answer for the high power's firing pin retaining plate fracture problem. And that was the what fixed it. Key thing here is MIM didn't exist when Dieudonné did the final design for the P35. And in that regard, there really wasn't a better solution. This was an overkick of the coverage, clearly, because of the amount of mainspring behind the hammer smacking that firing pin retaining plate. It was MIM technology that ultimately produced a part that no longer has a reputation of fracture. So there's we see not much in the way of total number of more parts and components and things that happened with the Mark III advancements. There was actually a net total of 3 parts: a pin, a pin, a spring, and the ambiside lever. So now we're up to the SFS era, the fast safety era, and again, what those things changed. That's what we're going to be going to here next time. I'm Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com.